capitalism is good when there are checks and balances. When there are not checks and balances, you have these companies that are charging the small guy. For instance, with my company, I had a $9,000 bill last month for our health insurance for our company, and we only have like 8 or 9 people that are hired there from the United States. And so our company has decided we're a healthcare company, so we're going to make sure that our staff have great health insurance. I don't want them worrying about that while they're trying to take care of other people. But it comes as a cost. It comes at a cost. And so when you look at large companies, very large companies, they're able to get different type of plans called self-funded plans. Those are the type of insurance plans where they submit all of their member information to the insurance company and they pay as they use it.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people watching us from around the world, they say, okay, we know where Canada is in British Columbia on the West Coast, right? Right. And then you have that big city there called Vancouver. Yes. And we are 500 miles or 800 kilometers for our European friends north of Vancouver, in central British Columbia, right in the middle, north to south, east to west. Big state or province. And then the other part about British Columbia is that we have, in northern British Columbia in particular, we have a large forest, and within 50 miles of our city here, we have probably 100 lakes all over the place, and we have lots of other friends in nature: black bears, grizzly bears, mooses, caribou, deer, you name it, we have them all here, and I call it paradise. Today we have a very special guest, and her name is Dr. Jessica Edwards. And Jessica, a very interesting guest, as I said. She's a board certified family physician, healthcare entrepreneur, and an executive MBA candidate. Uh, as a physician, entrepreneur, wife, and mother of 2, including a child with autism, she has firsthand experience navigating career, burnout, balancing family and business, which is a challenge, obviously, and building something new within the broken system. And we will be talking about that, and particularly about Zara Medical that she created, and she will tell us all about that. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, share with us, you are located in New York,
Yes.
Brooklyn, New York, and so tell us about your background. How did you had had your education, and then came through the system, and then decided to become a physician, and not only that part, but also an entrepreneur. And then obviously you have concerns about the medical system in the United States. I do too, about Canada, and likely around the same lines. So share us first a bit about your background.
Yeah, so my background is I am originally from Dallas, Texas. My dad is also a family medicine physician as well, and he was a pastor. So growing up, basically 7 days a week, you were, either at church or he was, at work. And so growing up, just being completely candid, I used to say like, "Oh my gosh, I do not want to be a doctor." I'm like, "Dad, why do you work every day?" And he's like, "My patients need me." And so, he would leave from preaching in the pulpit on Sunday morning, come home, eat really quick, and then have Sunday clinic. And then he'd come back with like apple pies and fruits and vegetables. And I mean, this was like back in the early 90s. So, it was like the barter system. And so, I think he was really ahead of his time because a lot of the things that are being implemented now, such as like the patient centered medical home, also the, home visits and things like that. He was featured in USA Today for doing that. And, he really felt like it was important to make healthcare accessible even back in the 90s. And so I grew up seeing that and I was like, I really wanted to be a chef and food critic. And so, my dad, I remember when I was younger, he'd say, like, "You're too expensive for that because you like to order lobster when we go to steakhouses." He was like, "You probably want to get a career that can, like, pay for your, hobbies and things like that, and do something different, for your career." So, the way that I ended up falling into medicine was completely happenstance. I was in my pre-AP biology course. I think I was like a sophomore in high school, and I had an 89 and I wanted a 90 so bad. So bad. I wanted all A's. And so I was like, is there any way for me to, I went to my teacher and I was like, is there any way for me to get an A? I want that 1 point. And she was like, you know what? She was like, come to my meeting for Health Occupation Students of America and, just attend the meeting just so I can have some people attend and I'll give you the extra credit. Next thing you know, I was president. I was pre med. I was a candy striper at the hospital where I was born. And it just kind of took off from there.
Amazing. So, and then, so you did the medical thing. You became a medical doctor, and then obviously went through that part, and then you decided to become an entrepreneur and say, there are things here that are not the way they can or should be. And you said, I'm going to do something about it. So I'll become an entrepreneur. And then what happened?
Well, what's very interesting is being an entrepreneur was never really in the cards for me. I mean, that was nothing I envisioned myself doing initially. But, there's a statistic that about 50% of clinicians, leave their first job within a couple of years of leaving because, we're still learning the nuts and bolts. And so I did what most physicians, do after, a year of working at their first job. And I decided to, leave. I was going to look for other employment opportunities. And then what ended up happening is all of my pregnant patients. So I'm a family medicine doctor. So I'm like, you know, years ago, I was traditional family medicine. I mean, delivering babies in the hospital, doing circumcisions, all of that sort of stuff. Um, but I was put in a position where I was going to have these patients that I had to care for, and I didn't have a place to take care of them at. I knew when they went to the hospital, they were going to call me for them. And so it sort of sent my husband and I, who has his bachelor's from Rutgers in business, it kind of sent us into sort of this crossroads where it's like, okay, we either roll the dice with these patients or we just jump out there and, you know, develop our own clinic and do it our way. And, by that time I'd actually was wrapping up a health policy fellowship, which was, one of the biggest things for me that catapulted me into becoming an entrepreneur because I saw all of these problems and pain points. And I was like, well, how can I use my experience as a doctor and then also having a business arm with me that, doesn't have any benefit to just make a lot of money. He's here to support me. How do we kind of create the perfect sort of, clinic for patients? And so in the area I was practicing in at the time, it's called New Braunfels, Texas. It's a little old German town, halfway between Austin and San Antonio. We created a clinic, and I started off lean. I started off small. I actually was in a place called My Salon Suites because it met all of the ADA requirements, for having accessibility and all of that sort of stuff. And it had a ring in system, and a lot of the beauticians and lash artists and things like that were my patients. They sent patients to me, and it was a really good experience. But I was able to start slow and make a lot of the small mistakes without having too many things at stake, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that made a
And
lot of
also,
sense because you started smaller and
correct.
still, how long ago would that have been then?
It was in 2019, actually.
In 2019, so about 6 years ago. And so then already then there were all kinds of issues in the medical system. And in Canada, we have the same. I believe we have issues not enough docs, not enough nurses, and emergency rooms or operating rooms being closed, not because there were no docs. In some cases, there were no docs. Otherwise, there was no support staff, and all those issues. And
Right.
a lot of money is being spent on the medical system, but the results are not good. I should say, at least not here. We have lots of communities that have no dogs. We have a lot of peoples that have no dogs, and still emergency rooms being closed or not available because of lack of dogs. So, what was the main problems among many likely in the United States at that point that made you think about, together with your husband, that maybe there are entrepreneurial opportunities where we can start a business and still utilize your medical background, obviously, and experience, and then start out slowly, make, as you already said, some of the mistakes, work your way through it, and then build from there.
Well, I think some of the things, that I identified in the health policy fellowship, shout out to my mentor. His name is Dan Skinner. He's amazing. He is a health policy leader in Ohio. And so that experience for me was incredible because they basically walked us through the entire healthcare system. They showed us the difference between healthcare policy, healthcare legislation. They showed us the differences of where are these evidence-based sources? What are the stats? What are the facts? Because a lot of times I think as a doctor, when you walk into a room, people listen. There's data that shows that. And so I think having people listen to the right information, I think is what matters, right? And so I always, say that as a clinician, I don't do politics, I do policy. So I don't want to hear about like, oh, this is what I think. No, this is what the numbers show. So if we start from like the top, right? Like I'll say from my experience dealing with my patients in my pregnant patients who are in New Braunfels, Medicaid would pay like half of what Medicare would pay for a patient, and they'd pay weeks later after the visit. So it's like, how are you supposed to operate a clinic where you're not being paid for your services until weeks later? I would say that's a big problem. The other issue is that if you look at Medicare, just in general here in the United States, a lot of the spending in the budget, I think 30% of the spending in the Medicare budget is pharmaceutical costs. And 90% of those, 90% of that 30% cost is for 10 drugs. And why is that? Because there's legislation that Medicare cannot negotiate drug prices, or at least until the Biden administration. I think that's probably going to get rolled back. So you see all of these things, and then you also look at it from the other perspective of all of the good insurance benefit plans are tied to having an employer. So when you look at it, when you move a job, you lose your health insurance, you have to start all over again. And so I think those are some of like the high level areas of like where we have gone wrong as a country because, I think just in general, when you have it set up, capitalism is good when there are checks and balances. When there are not checks and balances, you have these companies that are charging the small guy. For instance, with my company, I had a $9,000 bill last month for our health insurance for our company, and we only have like 8 or 9 people that are hired there from the United States. And so our company has decided we're a healthcare company, so we're going to make sure that our staff have great health insurance. I don't want them worrying about that while they're trying to take care of other people. But it comes as a cost. It comes at a cost. And so when you look at large companies, very large companies, they're able to get different type of plans called self-funded plans. Those are the type of insurance plans where they submit all of their member information to the insurance company and they pay as they use it. Why is that not available to the average working person? Why is that not
Mhm.
available to small businesses and things like that? So I think those are some of like the high level things that we have to look at. And then also I think our drug creation process also drives up pharmaceutical prices as well.
And the drug processing challenges are which one, other than cost is very high, as I understand it.
It is. Well, I think when you look at it from an objective perspective and you step back and look, these companies basically form, they create all of their infrastructure. They have to get all of their, facilities to test. They have to do all of their protocols, research, hire the researchers, hire the doctors to monitor things. And they come out of pocket for that all up front. Most people don't know that. Sometimes they can get grants, sometimes they don't, sometimes they get funding, they don't. And so what ends up happening is they go through the steps of the FDA process, which is usually about 4 different phases of the research. And it takes on average about 7 years to even create a drug.
FDA means what? Federal?
That's the Food and Drug Administration
Yeah,
here in the United States. So yeah.
correct. Yeah.
Yes. So, yeah, it takes like 7 years to create a drug. So imagine a company starting, paying all these employees, setting up all of this, and then they get to launch on the market. When they launch on the market, they're able to charge basically whatever they want for like the first couple of years until the patent is released, and then other companies can start charging. And then that drives the price down.
So what I see a lot of times, we watch, although we are in Canada, but we are virtually one and the same in terms of languages. We watching each other's television. Mainly, we watch USA. I watch lots of CNN, and I see drug companies advertising their drugs on
Mhm.
CNN. Well, that must be very, very expensive, and
It-
so and then there is a sizable difference in terms of drug cost between Canada and the United States.
right, right. There's a
Why
huge disparity.
why other than the obvious, the initial 2 years or whatever it is to recover the cost of developing the drugs, but then even after that there is still a huge difference between the two countries, I believe.
Yeah, capitalism.
Yeah.
It just, if you look at, like, think about this, there's been the huge GLP-1 thing. Everybody's like, oh, I want Ozempic, I want Wegovy, I want Manjaro, I want to lose weight. And there are a lot of patients that I've taken care of who've benefited from those drugs. And it has basically reversed a lot of disease processes that they've had, from high blood pressure, high cholesterol, insulin resistance, diabetes, prediabetes, all of these conditions. And for a month's supply of these medications, when they first came out, it was like $2,000 a month. And the prices are slightly lower now. They're like 1,300 after they've been out for a couple of years, but it's nonsense. Why does it cost that much for the medication for 1 month for a patient? That's ridiculous. And so what's happened is that there have been a lot of patients that have not been able to get it. So then you have compounding pharmacies that are mixing the medications and they're doing that. But how do you regulate that? And so now all of these patients in like a month or so are going to lose access to compounded semaglutide. I think they're losing access to compounded tirzepatide in the next day or two. Um, but that's a big issue. And so I think when that initial cost comes up and those pharmaceutical companies are, pushing these drugs, they're advertising them on TV, they're trying to get people to sell their company. When you think about it, I think there's a bit of a conflict of interest with a business or a company actually producing medication that's meant for life-saving measures,
Yes.
because their responsibility as a business is to their shareholders.
Yes. Yeah.
Kind of blurs the lines there. And so I think that there's a possibility for being able to fix this, but it requires a lot of restructuring. And what's unfortunate here in our country is that here in the United States, I just don't know if there's anyone who's actually really willing to take those hits initially to get things set up the way that they need to be for sustainability for healthcare in our country. And so
So
that's why I decided to wait and I did it myself.
so that is part of policy as well, right? Of
Right.
government policy and obviously without becoming political here, but you have a new Secretary of Health or whatever you call him, Kennedy,
Mhm.
Robert Kennedy's son, or I don't even know what his
Yep.
first name is. So he uh, has been fairly controversial to get him into that file, and for a number of reasons. Will they make positive changes, or will it be again based on capital?
I mean, I think, unfortunately, we kind of both know the answer to that question. I
Yeah,
mean,
we
I
do.
think there will, but I think there will be some positive changes. I think, just, I will say to you, I think that over the last couple of years, my mindset has sort of expanded in getting my master's in business administration. I actually graduate next Friday. Um, because I understand both sides of it. And so, years ago, I used to hear people say, like, oh, if you're a doctor and you have your MBA, you're like a unicorn. And I understand that because now when I'm looking at some of these situations, we have a health and human services secretary who's never been in that type of role, who's looking at why is it so expensive for healthcare? Why are these foods so poisonous? Why, he's looking at it, I would say, from a different lens. Now, what he decides to do with that and how that affects things, I think is left to be said. But I would say, if nothing else, getting a fresh set of eyes that hasn't been a part of the bureaucracy, that has been not really improving things over the last, 50, 60 years, I think will be interesting to see what type of policies come out. That's what I'm interested to see. I'm interested to see, about our food. If you think about all of the pesticides and things like that that are put on our foods, if you start to think about a lot of the red dyes and stuff like that that's mixed into our food, I do think that some of those things are haven't really been tackled, and I think there's a really great opportunity to tackle those, but ultimately, unfortunately, we're the place where our country is right now, it's pay to play.
It's what?
It's pay to play.
Pay to play. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. So just a little bit about me. I'm 84 years young, and so age is just a number, I say. Quality of life is what is critical in my world.
100%.
And I wasn't always that way, but then in 2008, I got a case. My wife is a vegetarian, and so very. And I didn't listen as well to her as I should and could have. I was not totally abusive, but I was just like a lot of other people. They say, at the end of the year, I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing, and I'm going to buy a membership to the gym. And then they do that for 2 weeks, and then they find 100 reasons why they're too busy to go to the gym. And so and so I got a case. I got a warning. I got a case of diverticulitis that ruptured,
Mhm.
and so that is very serious. As you know, as a doc, I waited too long. I had a lot of pain, but that is not good. It should put you down. You get to the hospital, blah blah blah. So I came this close to not making it, and so they operated on me, took 20 centimeters out of my colon, and then from there on in, I got the warning. So, and that's now a long time ago already, fortunately. And so then I started listening better in terms of my diet to my wife. So I'm very particular about that. The other part that I did is I knew I had to become much more serious about fitness. And so
Mhm.
I went to the gym, got a trainer, and stayed with it, very committed. And after being training for 6 years, the somebody came up to us while I was training and say, "Hey, John, have you ever thought about competing?" I said, "Me?
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
my
Yeah,
so now I
awesome.
was already well into my 70s, so I did that. So I competed bodybuilding and physique in Northern British Columbia, came in second bodybuilding, third in physique, qualified me for the provincials, did about the same, which qualified me for the nationals and the Arnolds. And then COVID came. And so now at 84, again, I'm training for the Arnolds and next year when I'm 85. And and I wrote a book about that. I've written a number of books. Actually, this is the book that I wrote. This is a picture of me, actually. And so living young, dying old is, and the whole topic is about fitness, and then to me, a number of things are important. A, to stay, go to the gym. I still do that now. And right after this show, I'm in the gym again, and I do it on a regular basis, and I'm in good shape. Just still training for competition. And my diet, I'm very careful about diets now. Amazingly, I do all the shopping, even for my wife. Can you believe that? I go to the store. I will stay in the outside of the store where I don't go to the alleys because that's where the protein, and I don't know what is in it. So we do that. And so now, that then being said, that I was lucky and I'm staying. Vitamin D, lots of sunshine is important to me. I get lots of sleep. I sleep between 8 and 9 hours a night. At the same time, I'm very careful about my diet. And then obviously, I'm into exercise, stay mentally active, hence podcasting, writing books, and doing all those kind of things. And then the other part about me is that I was born in Holland in 1940, in northeastern part of Holland, just before the war, and I can do a whole program about that. But we saw far too much of the things we should not have seen. Academically, I was not a success story. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times. And then they said, "What are we going to do with this guy?" And so my parents are beautiful people, and so some people said, "Send him to the mentally challenged school." He said, "No, we're not going to do that. Let's train him in a job where he can use his hands." And so they sent me to a furniture factory to become a furniture maker. But we were liberated by the Canadian Army April the 12th, 1945. It made such an impression on me that I knew from that point forward I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada. And so that's what I did when I was 24 years old. I came to Canada with the dream of also being in lumber. My grandfather was a master carpenter. My dad worked in lumber to build a lumber mill. And they said, if you do that, you have to go to British Columbia. That's where all the trees are. And so, in particular, in northern British Columbia. So, Prince George is where I am today. I can still see the Greyhound station here, a couple of blocks away where it used to be. And so that's where I came uh, with very little. I had a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and then I had very little money, and so I counted my money at least 3 times. I had $25.47. Couldn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job. But what I did have, a positive attitude. I had, that I always avoid negative. I always look at,
Yes,
no matter how tough today is, I always believe tomorrow is going to be a better day. I have passion. Whatever I do, I give it 125%. And work ethic. I work harder than anybody. At 84, I get up at 5:30 in the morning. And then I always make my bed, and I'm always in a hurry. I always think I'm late. And so that's what I do. And so the other part I was going to share with you is that I always was wondering, why a lot of my friends that went to school and that went then on to colleges and universities, they used to be my friends, but then when I became a laborer, I'm proud of that today. But then it was kind of looked down at. And so I
Mm,
felt by going to Canada, I could start all over again because I felt personally that I was just as smart as any of the others, but
100%.
not better then. But I did, and so when I came here with nothing, I wanted to build a lumber mill, and fairly quickly I became involved in the lumber industry, and then very quickly within 10 years I had one company, and then many other ones, and then but I still did not feel good about myself as to why was I not successful in the educational system and all the other things. And then what happened one day after I had been here for 32 years in 1997, January of 1997, I walked into a bookstore here in town and I bought a book. This is the book here, the actual book. And I picked it up
Mm,
and I said, the title of the book was Driven to Distraction by
mm.
Dr. Hollywell, medical doctor.
Okay.
And the more I looked at the book, he was ADHD and had dyslexia. And I said, oh my God, that's me. And so, and I wrote in the book in Dutch actually, because I was ashamed of it, that now I finally know who I am. And it was
Mm.
January 1997.
Wow.
And the more I found out about it, reading about it in this book, and this is the actual book. Dr. Hellieswell
Wa
has written 18 books, medical doctor, professor, an expert in the field of ADHD in particular, and other things, obviously. And, so the more I looked at it, and then the more I looked on Google and started to checking this out, I believe it's a superpower. And so I went to my own doc, who was a personal friend, had delivered our two daughters. And so I walked into his office and he said, hey, John, why are you here? I said, I think I got ADHD. And so, and we checked it out. And yes, I do. By then I was 62 years old. And so the looking back, I left school, grade 7, for the third time. I was about 12 and a half years old. For From 12 years old to 62, 50 years. I knew I was different, but I did not know why until I picked up this book and then got the
Wow.
diagnosis. And so that changed my life in a way. And so, and then the other part was the obviously, what happened with my diverticulitis, and that changed my life in terms of health and fitness. And so, since that time, I became an author. I've written 4 books. A fifth one is coming out actually in June, and became more successful in business and all the other things. And then became more proactive in terms of sharing my experience of ADHD with others. And I
Yeah.
wrote a book about that actually, ADHD Unlocked, very
Mm.
popular.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so yeah, and so that's and then the other part that is interesting, Jessica, that you may find interesting, you are my podcast number 391, where I'm the guest or hosting a podcast. I've done about 200 where I'm a guest on other people's podcasts. I have a podcast number 203 on the brink that I did, can you believe it, with Dr. Hollywell,
Oh, wow.
that
Okay.
wrote this book in 1993. I bought it in 1997 and I podcasted him last year. And the interesting part about it is that all the things that I've read, read about it is that I believe that frequency of occurrence in ADHD is probably around
Mhm.
8%, I believe. But then I thought it was higher than that. So when I podcasted Dr. Halliwell, I suggested, and he's the expert, not me, although I lived it, I suggested to him that I thought it was probably more like 20%. He said, no, John, more like 25 at least. And then the other part that I suggested to Dr. Halliwell is that in all the time that I've been in business, did all kinds of things in business, been on board of directors, met a lot of successful people, entrepreneurs, business people, and of the successful ones that I met in that field, I believed, I suggested to Dr. Halliwell that probably 50% of them are ADHD. He said, no, John,
Yep.
probably 75%. I agree with him. And so it changed my life.
Wow. That's incredible.
So the other part about it is that I do a lot of presentations in a lot of areas,
Mhm.
and especially to young people and other
Okay.
ones. But I always include some of the issues around ADHD, and it has, for me, been something that obviously changed my life and is a very, very important part of my life. And so, as I shared with them, by the time I'm done with my presentation, I always ask how many people in the room have ADHD and how many people may think that they may, and there is several out there. And then by the time I'm done, there are a lot of people in the room say, "Darn, I wish I had it too." So, Jessica, so tell us about, you have two daughters, or two,
I have a son and a daughter. Yes.
son and a daughter,
And I have
and autism is your son or your daughter?
son has autism. Yes, my oldest child, he has autism.
So the and for you from a medical perspective and having so much knowledge,
Mhm.
I believe that the awareness of those autisms, ADHD, and numerous dyslexia, which has been part of me, is becoming a lot more recognized in terms of not so much yet on the educational system and recognizing it maybe to the level that they should, at least in Canada. I believe in other places as well. But how do you find it in terms of, from your perspective as a medical doctor and a knowledgeable individual that is aware of these things? Where do we go from here in terms of recognizing our educational system and the awareness of it?
I think, a few things. So one, just to kind of give you a little bit of background, my son was actually, conceived using, artificial reproductive technology. So we did intrauterine insemination, in order to get pregnant with him. Um, so in my mind, from a practical perspective, I figured I was like, this wasn't a naturally conceived pregnancy. There's a risk, of potential genetic things. And then, after long period, actually a year or so ago, we ended up finding out that there was a strong history of autism on my husband's side of the family, like in his sister and things like that. And so, um, for me, I think most of the time parents know, right? Like, you're like, he's not really doing things the way other kids do. But, I think the biggest thing for me has always been, I'm not going to categorize him. I'm not going to treat him, like, oh, he can't do this, etc. And so one day, I think one of his daycare teachers called me, and he was 2 at the time. And she's like, hey, Franklin can't sit down. She's like, he can't really focus, and he's not really, speaking words. She was like, I think you should get him checked out. Like, I don't know what's going on. And, I've been thinking that also, but, it's just kind of one of those things, don't really want to do it because you don't really want to find out what's on the other side of it. And
Exactly.
so when they call, right, we really, kind of had no choice. And so I got into, the mode of getting things done. And what's interesting is he actually got diagnosed with COVID at University of UT Health San Antonio. Right as COVID was happening, I remember talking to the doctor because as a physician, I had sort of an in to, but I'm like, hey, who does everybody go to for autism diagnosis of their child? And I talked to her, and she's like, hey, like, are you sure you want to come to the hospital, right now while COVID is going on? I was like, if I get COVID and I find out what's going on with my child, I'm fine with that. He'll be
Yeah.
fine. I've got life insurance policy, like whatever. And I remember when she gave me the diagnosis, I just remember breaking down. I broke down. I cried and cried and she's like, Jessica, it's gonna be fine. And, you know, and so when I left the appointment, you could only have one person, with the child, et cetera. So my husband had to wait in the car. And so I got back in the car and, I told him what was going on. And we gave ourselves that day to grieve. And after that, we said, you know what? For the rest of our lives, we're going to fight to make sure that he has everything that he needs. And so I shifted my medical practice to be hybrid, where I would do a couple of days in the office, a couple of days virtually, so that we could be stable for him. We got him into all of the right therapies. Now, this is where our education system goes wrong. Okay. Our education system, I mean, that's why we live in Brooklyn, New York. Like you said, I'm from Texas.
Yeah.
But the autism services there are not great. And so now my son is in a classroom where it's like six other students. They've got two helpers, one teacher. He's got activities of daily living. He's becoming so independent. Like he's trying to cook his own food now and he dresses himself. Like he can do a lot more things that he could not do previously because life is also tied into his education. And so when that doesn't happen, it makes it very challenging for children to go on beyond that, right? And then also, in his classroom, there's a touchscreen TV, a big touchscreen TV. And so the kids can go up there and, there's a lot of sensory components of that. And so I think to make a long story short, I would say that it's necessary to meet children where they are, trying to make children sit down all day and write and do this and that and not include outside, not include field trips, not include, ways for them to learn how they learn best and assessing every child individual and say, okay, these kids learn best this way. Let's put them here. It's just not enough happening like that. And so what's scary now for me as a parent, I mean, one, we're gonna stay in New York. Obviously we can't go back to Texas with especially, Department of Education cuts. But what's scary now is with the dismantling of the Department of Education here in the States, the problem is going to be having the teeth to actually enforce these IEPs that parents and educators work together every year to come up with for their children. That's the problem. And
Yes.
so that's some of the things that I'm seeing, just in general. But yeah, I think our education system, we've got to have like standards across the boards, not just for academic success, but also for life success. We've got to start, even for children that are not autistic, we have to start teaching more life skills. We have to start teaching more trade skills. We have to start doing that because, to be honest with you, technology can do so many things, but it can't change a light bulb, at least not yet.
No.
Right? Like it can't fix a toilet. It can't, and so we have to be able to balance out what we're teaching people that's practical and then also beneficial.
Yes. And that's likely one of the benefits that I had from very quickly at the age of 12 and a half years old being in the workplace and getting exposure to a lot of things that were very helpful looking back, especially with me, that helped me when I started a whole new life here in Canada, uh,
Uh-huh.
following a dream. But a lot of the experience that I had developed during my early years in Holland, when I left school at 12 and a half years old, and and then especially with ADHD. So the more comical part of it is that sometimes doing my presentations, I had a question in saying, Do you feel bad about it even now still that you left school, failed 3 times? And I said, yeah, I do. I really do. Even now still, I should have left earlier, you know. So, uh, so that so looking at it from that kind of perspective, it didn't stop me from writing 5 6 books, and I probably write another couple at least, and then being a very active podcaster and doing other things, but helped me as well, Jessica, just to share with you is that I was not a very good communicator. And so even already when I was successful, a lot of people said, "Oh, you're so successful, you should write a book." And writing books is not easy. And so and I started for about 20 years, and then about 6 years ago, if I said if I don't do it now, it will never happen. And so I did, and I wrote this one. It took me 80 years to live it, 20 years to think about it, 2 years to write it. And then after that, ADHD and a number of other ones, including this one, the most current one. And, so one of the other things that happened is that I was okay communicating and having self confidence, but still, I was not good at it other than inside of my own companies with about 3 or 4 people, not more than that. And then an ex sister in law that I had said, "Hey, John, I want you to go with me to a place that you may like." And I said, "What is it?" She said, "Toastmasters." I said, "Oh, never heard of that." Yeah, well, it's about communications and developing communication skills and confidence. And I said, "Are they going to ask me any questions?" She said, "No, you just sit there and watch." I said, "Okay." So I went down
Yeah.
there, and halfway through the meeting, somebody said, "Hey, John, tell us all about we." And I said, "Oh my God, I'll never go back here." But I did. I stayed there for 10 years and then became a
Wow.
distinguished Toastmaster, and it changed my life. And so just through circumstance. And so if I look back for me, is that, being liberated by the Canadians changed my life because the dream then developed to go to Canada, working, coming out of school, and knowing that I can do it, and having the dream of build my own lumber mill. Yes, I did, and a number of other companies. That changed my life. And then in 1990, I went to Toastmasters, stayed there for 10 years, went to the highest level. That gave me the ability to create confidence and at the same time improve my communication skills. And then the next one that changed my life is in January 1997 when I found a book from Driven to Distraction and say, "Oh my God, that's me, ADHD," and then being diagnosed and understanding it, and then
Right.
realizing it's a superpower. And now, a lot of
Yeah.
times, what happens, people say, how do you do all this stuff that you do? You have 10 different companies and you write books and you do this. I say ADHD, that's how I do it.
Right.
So I wanted to
Yeah.
share that with you. I wanted to share that with you so that, in particular, looking at the other challenges that we may have, is that there are benefits to it. And obviously, I'm not a good reader, but I'm a good writer. And then,
Mm.
in terms of getting the confidence, in terms of being communications and developing self-confidence, and then the experience that you may have built through it can be a real benefit.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that, I actually got diagnosed with ADHD January of last year. I started my MBA and I was like, man, I'm like procrastinating. I'm not getting this work done. And I was like, and my son has ADHD. So I was like, well, let me just do the test. Let me just, and I'm like, ooh, ooh. Ooh, wow, like, I so, it's like when the doctor is, like, the patient, you're like, "Oh, wow, okay, alright," and, I finished the questionnaire and I score it myself, and I'm like, "Okay, then, at least I know," and so I ended up getting full, neuropsychological testing, and yes, it is a superpower. I think once you know, it can kind of help you communicate better with those around you, because one of the things my husband, I work from home now, and so he would, come in the room and talk to me while I was doing something else, and I would get overwhelmed, and he would think I was irritated with him, and I'm like, "No, I'm not irritated with you. It's just kind of like brain overload." I can only handle so many things at one time. And so once I got that diagnosis, I was able to communicate that to him, and it has helped with so many things in my life, just in general, being able to communicate how I need things done and how I need people to support me.
Isn't it amazing, Jessica? When I wrote this book, ADHD Unlocked, the forward, I will send these books to you. I will sign them for you,
Oh,
all four of them. I will sign to you.
I
And
I
and
love reading. Oh,
and this one is written by the forward was written by Dr. Tracy Lotz, medical doctor, CHB, CCF. I don't know what that all means, but she is also an emergency physician and
okay.
ADHD. Dr. Tracy Lotz is a good friend, and and she wrote a forward for the book, and so can you believe it? So and so I usually include it in to some of the presentations that I do, issues about ADHD. Uh, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I did a presentation in the province of Alberta, Calgary, actually, for the Alberta ADHD Association. And so there were about 400 people, all ADHD connected or relating to. But a lot of times I do those kind of presentations because it is so important to me. But most of the times where I do most of my communications now is doing podcasting, because can you believe it? There we are sitting here. You are in New York. I'm sitting here in central British Columbia. And while we are never have met before, I read your bio, obviously, which is extremely interesting, but I had no idea about all the other things that we have talked about. And we developed a relationship here
Yeah,
which will stay with us. And in the meantime, and not bragging about the power of podcasting and the new media, as I call it, is that
yeah.
people from around the world are watching us. uh, I'm about 760,000 subscribers
I
on YouTube.
love that.
And so that means that more than 1 million people, between 1 million and 2 million people from around the world, are watching our conversation. Isn't it amazing how
Power
powerful it is?
Powerful. Podcasts are very powerful.
And so that's the part that I like about it. So have you got websites, or how do people contact you? Can you share that with us as well?
Yes. So you can contact me. Our website is www.zaramedical.com. We are a telehealth company. We serve about 25 states in the United States. And we have same day, next day primary care for virtual care. So people can contact me that way. They can also contact my management team at management@zaramedical.com as well. Social media, you can find us for Zara Medical, not hard to find. And then Instagram, we're Zara Medical One. Yeah, I mean, I think my quest has been, and I think things have shifted for me, right? Like my quest used to be, I want to be the best doctor I can be, to I want to be the best wife and mom I can be, to being I want to be the best version of myself so that I can be the best that I can be with everything else. And
Yes.
that's where my perspective is at this point. So, um, it's been an incredible journey, just sort of seeing how everything has, played out and happened. But I will say that I think we're doing something very special with our company, because we're taking care of a lot of patients that sometimes may not have the courage to go to the doctor. Some patients haven't been to the doctor since they lost their pediatrician when they were 18. I remember my pediatrician telling me, "You are too big to be my patient." It was devastating. It's the only doctor I ever had. It took me 6 years to find a doctor that I really liked.
Exactly.
And so I think really trying to make a difference in my lane has been what my goal has been. But I have learned to prioritize putting myself and my family first, and then being the best version of myself for everyone else.
So now, what advice do you have? And I'm taking one of your questions that you suggested. What advice do you have for other working women trying to build a career without sacrificing family life? And
I think
that's
you have to
maybe
pick
what you just told us, right?
yeah, I think it's really like picking your battles. Like, I mean, I remember reaching really a significant point of burnout when I took on a leadership role with the healthcare startup. I was the chief medical officer. And then I ended up seeing, like, how jacked up the operations were. And the operations really, when it comes to medicine, the practicing medicine part is easy. It's everything else that happens that can make or break a patient experience. And so, I took all that on. And so looking back, I should have said, "You know what? This is a mess. This is not something that I need to do. Thank you for the opportunity," and move on.
Yeah.
If I could do it all over again, that's what I would have done because you as women, I feel like we're nurturers and so we pour ourselves into things. We want to give it our all because, with our children, with our family, with our, husbands, we try to give our all. You can't do that with a career. It's a job. It's a transactional thing. So killing yourself, you know, not in that sense, but
No, no.
really just overextending yourself trying to climb this corporate ladder and to make this company the best success that it can be, it doesn't come home with you. And so I always tell women, especially young single women that are in medical school, go with the man that likes you. Don't try to go with or a partner that likes you, should I say, right? Like, don't try to go for someone's title because you need support. If you're trying to do medicine, you need support. You don't need someone just to say, "Oh, yes, I'm married to this doctor. He's a surgeon, blah, blah, blah." You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
it's completely different. Like, and when you're confident about it, other people are confident about it. And
exactly.
so I've always that would be the advice that I would say to younger women who are in this.
Now, one more question about you and your businesses now that you virtually do everything virtual or also in person.
I
And
do virtual right now. In person is a big expense operationally,
yeah.
so we're trying to work smarter, not harder, and make sure that we can provide the highest quality care for our patients.
And so then you do it also on an international level because everything is becoming more and more global.
It is, and that's something that I'm exploring and looking into now, for sure.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm doing is that I've been very active in podcasting, and I love it, obviously. And we, and I'm meeting the most interesting people from around the world. The amazingly, and it is just on its infancy now. So I'm kind of thinking about. I've done writing books, obviously done uh, in-person presentations. The only thing, the problem there is it takes, respectfully, takes more than 2 days for me usually do a presentation in the States or somewhere in Canada by the time I get there. And although I may be making presentation to 200, 300, 400, whatever hundreds they are, that it can never meet the spectrum that I will reach on this media, on podcasting, and it's only on its, as I said, on its infancy. The next thing that I'm looking at is doing a platform of some sort, and I'm working towards that part.
I think you're definitely gonna put if anybody's gonna pull it off, you are. You are incredible, such an inspiration to, have met you and learned wisdom from you today, and I aspire to be like you when I am, where you are because I think you figured it out.
I appreciate that, Jessica. I'm going to send you my books. I'm going to sign
Awesome.
them. You will get them next week. Scott will get the address from you. We'll make sure
Okay.
that your contacts will appear. We will we turn things around very, very quickly. This presentation will go live this afternoon, available to your guests as well from around the world. And then for all the people watching us from around the world, we appreciate you the liking it, uh, becoming, and make comments on it, and then contact Jessica on her Facebook for any information that you want or contact that you want. And Jessica, this was an amazing, amazing podcast. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. We'll stay in
Oh,
touch.
yes. Stay in touch. It was so nice to meet you today. Take care.
Take care, Jessica. Bye bye.
Bye bye.